It's 2021, I've just started grade 8 and I've become reasonably good friends with this kid named Josh. Now at first I didn't actually like Josh because the year before we'd nearly gotten into a punch on with each other, and on top of that I just thought he was a bit of a f***it in general, okay? But he came back this year a little bit more mature. He seemed a lot different than he was the previous year, and on top of that his house had recently burned down, so I did feel for him, I bared a bit of sympathy for him. And yes, this is the same Josh from my previous video, but this story is much, much darker. Okay, so Josh and I start kicking it together every single day at school, and it gets to around early April. By this point, he's sort of acquainted with all my mates. My mates are his mates, and he decides to invite all of us boys around to his house to stay for the night. Now, the plan for this night was pretty simple. We're going to eat a couple of each and ash up. But there was just one problem with this plan, all right? It might not sound too bad on paper, but it most definitely was, because Josh was on all types of prescription medication. He had antidepressants, he was on his ADHD medication, and he had never partaken in these activities before. Okay, so the mixture of those two things definitely wasn't going to go well. Pull up to Josh's house, I walk inside, say hello to his mum and that, walk upstairs, and on this particular night, the people who were there are Josh, Dallas, and my best mate Crocker, as well as myself, obviously. Around 20 minutes into being there, we decide we're going to eat our tips and kick back in his room for a bit. All right, so we eat them, and we decide we're going to go out by the fire like 10 minutes later, right? So we go out by the fire, we get the fire going, and no more than 20 minutes later, we decide we're going to go back inside. It's hit us, and we don't want to be outside for that. Okay, so we get back inside, and to make a long story short, Josh wigs the fuck out, okay? Just like you would expect. You tell someone this story 100%, that's obviously what's going to happen first time, all these other factors that go into it. So he's spinning the fuck out. I won't go into detail because I've done a video on it before. But after this night, Josh starts wanting to do more and more stuff like shit like this with us boys. And instead of it being us boys that had asked him, like, do you want to do something this weekend? You want to come around this person's house? You want to ash up here or there? It started to be him, what are you boys doing this weekend? Or you want to come around to mine? You want to ash up this and that? Yo, brother, real quick, if you're enjoying this story, hit the subscribe button right now. You have no idea how much it helps me out. But with that said, I'll let you get back to the video, boy. Now, to give you a bit of a rough history on Josh, he had a really dark sense of humor. And it wasn't your typical dark sense of humor, like death jokes or whatever. He would have very specific jokes, okay? So when his house burned down, in front of the whole class, he would make jokes about his house burning down that would actually hit, like it would get the whole class laughing. And like, to some degree it was funny, yeah? But you just got to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Like, this motherfucker's lost everything that was sentimental to him. Photo albums, any kids' toys, any memories that he had in that house. It's all gone. And he's making public jokes about it, okay? And I suppose that's something that drew me to him, to be friends with him. I really commended his ability to be able to make a joke out of literally anything. Like, he was always making jokes about how he had ADHD and all that sort of thing. So I always found it funny and very interesting, his sense of humor. But I never really read into why he would make jokes about the things he would, which I'll get to in a minute. Right, so a couple of weeks go by, we have a few experiences at Josh's house, similar to the first one, but Josh doesn't wig out the following times. But it gets to a Monday morning in the middle of May, okay? I walk to Josh's house in the morning from the mall where my mum dropped me. And I walk inside, right? I start talking to Josh. He walks upstairs, he's getting ready as he talks to me. And I'd say about 20 minutes into talking to him, he tells me something which I'll never forget. It was just so fucked up that it will never leave my mind, okay? And it really put into perspective how fucked Josh's life was and how different it was to the life that I live, okay? So we're sitting on the bed, and he tells me that a few months ago, his mum tried to kill herself. And he explains to me the way that she did it, right? She hopped in the car, she drove as fast as she possibly could, full force into a tree, okay? And when she crashed the car, Josh runs up the car, pulls her out, And when he does this, she starts blaming him for why it didn't work. You know, she starts beating him, abusing him, not just verbally, physically. And when I heard this, bro, I did not know how to react, because even just hearing that now, it doesn't sound, it almost sounds made up, okay? And knowing Josh and the amount of jokes that he'd make, and you know, he'd always pull the piss, I did not know if he was being serious, but this was by far the most serious I'd ever heard Josh talk, okay? So I was only to assume that he was 100% being serious and this was a true story. So, like I said, I literally have no idea what to say. I just tell him, bro, that is fucked. Like, I'm sorry that happened. That's pretty much all I could say. We walked to school that morning, and I remember on the way there, as we're talking, in my mind, the image of what he had just told me kept playing over and over again, like me imagining the way it happened and how it sort of was for him, because that's a tough weight to place on a 14-year-old boy, yeah? For him to go through that and then be able to tell me, another 14-year-old, so confidently, I really commended his bravery and his ability to just, you know, keep fucking jotting along and, you know, make jokes of all these things, although they're not overly funny. And it really put things into perspective for me, because it made me realize you can never 100% know who someone is, okay? Because I'd met this woman before. She seemed like super normal, okay? They lived in a pretty nice house. I knew the rent was cheap, but she didn't seem like the type of person to do this. But behind closed doors, she was fucking horrible to Josh. After this, we get a lot closer naturally. You know, he's just opened up and told me something that I imagine he didn't really tell many other people. But it gets to June, okay? And myself, Josh, and our other mate Todd decide we're going to walk up to the mall in the morning and esh up together. So we're sitting in the underground car park, you know, passing around. We esh up. Around 20 minutes later, we decide to walk to school. We arrive just as the bell's ringing, go to homeroom, and our first period is English, okay? I remember this because this day we had double English, right? We're sitting in class absolutely pissing ourselves, you know, not worrying about whether or not we're being loud. The teacher tells us to be quiet and do our work, but naturally we don't get any work done in this period. It gets to later on in the day and we have English once again. This time we're sitting somewhere different. It's closer to the back, all right? The first time we were sitting more towards the front. And Josh was the type of guy that if he thought something was a good idea, he'd just do it. He wouldn't think about it. He wouldn't run it by you. He'd just tell you, I'm going to do this, and then he'd do it literally no less than 5 seconds later. So we're having reading time in class. You know, you grab a book, you read for 15 minutes, and he whispers into my ear, "Oi, I'm going to throw this book at Heather." And, you know, me being the immature 14-year-old that I was, I just laugh instead of telling him not to do it. So a couple seconds later, he grabs the book and pegs it across the classroom, hitting his desired target, that being Heather. This girl gets very upset. Like, she gets up, turns around, she immediately knows it's Josh. She's yelling at him like, "Fuck you, this and that." And this absolutely fucks us, okay? Josh, myself, and Todd all get sent to the deputy's office, despite it being just Josh who threw it, okay? We were guilty by association for the mere fact we knew he was going to do it. And I remember after this, we had to sit in the deputy's office for the day doing our work. We got put in these like classroom monitoring cards for the next couple of weeks. But it's things like this that I think were like a way for Josh to escape, you know? He found this shit funny. It was a way for him to let emotion out through laughter. And every time he would do something like this, that was when you would see his face lit up, okay? It was just about every couple of days that Josh was doing something so out of pocket and so fucked up that he was getting sent straight to the deputy's office. And as most of you will know, she eventually got fed up and kicked him out of school. You know, she sent him to a completely different school for kids with learning difficulties, which I don't personally believe he belonged in, but I'll get to that in a sec. All right, but it gets to around August. Josh, his mum, and his little brother move out of this big mansion that they were renting. There were too many fucking problems with it. And they move in with Josh's nan and pop, okay? So we start coming around to Josh's just about every weekend, you know, eshing up, because there was like a little cabin in their backyard behind the house that we could have all to ourselves, you know, for our mischievous activities. And it was around this time that Josh started telling us about how fucking weird his mum was. You know, all the shit she would do, all the fucked up things she would say, how abusive she was. And, you know, at first we didn't believe him. We thought he was just spinning shit like he always would. But there was this one particular time where she came into the cabin whilst we were all there, and she just starts lying on top of him, yeah, and she's saying to him, "Oh, such a good boy," stroking him like a cat. And we were wigging out, bro. And anyhow, she ends up leaving the cabin because Josh told her that we think she's fucking weird, and she got super embarrassed. But, you know, I've said that story before, so I'm not going to dive deep here. Now, despite not really having much, Josh was always super generous and accommodating. Like, he was the type of that would literally shout an entire sesh just so he could spend time and have fun with you. You know, fun for 14-year-olds, right? But September rolls around and Josh starts getting heavy on the billies. And I mean heavy, like every day heavy. And the only reason I knew this was because I was the one who was getting it for him, okay? And I feel like once he started, you know, eshing up a bit more, he sort of let his guard down and started to tell us more things. So there was this one day where Crocker and myself were kicking back with him, and, you know, he'd had a few billies. And he starts talking, just like out of nowhere, starts talking about how abusive his mum is and how heavy she's been drinking recently. Like, she's a fucking alcoholic, pretty much. That is exactly what he's telling us. And it was at this point that I started to believe him, because he was saying it in the same serious tone as when he told me about, you know, what she had done when she drove into the tree. So I guess I somewhat believed him, but to a degree I thought, nah, this guy's just spinning stories, you know, he's fried as fuck. But over the next couple of weeks, Josh really started to change, you know, his habits, the way he was acting. He started showing up to school super late, you know, eyes glazed over. Some days I'd be able to ring him 20 times in a row. He wouldn't wake up to the call. He'd be that fried from the night before. He'd literally be passed out asleep at home. Wouldn't come to school some days. He'd somehow manage to get sick days off, although I knew he wasn't sick. He was just demotivated to do anything. I guess you'd say he was depressed, right? And I knew this addiction or this habit was getting much, much worse for him, because he went from buying maybe 1G, then 3Gs, to now buying a whole queue off me every single week. And it got to the point where he was buying so much he just couldn't keep up with it, and so was taking bills out of his pop's wallet to be able to fund this newfound addiction. And at the time, I didn't see a problem with it, okay? I knew it was wrong that he was taking the money, and to a certain degree, I was definitely blinded by the money. You know, $90 a week, that's a lot for a 14-year-old, okay? But despite that, I didn't see it to be an issue that he was doing it. You know, I thought, you know, he's just a normal teen trying to, enjoy himself like most teenagers do. I couldn't see that it was sort of a coping mechanism or a way to escape the life that he was living at home. And I couldn't see this because I didn't even realize that shit was that real at home. Like I said, Josh, I just thought he was spinning stories all the time. I didn't realize the situation that he was in. But anyhow, his behavior starts to get a lot better at school. And it's getting a lot better because he's a lot quieter, okay? He's just not talking as much. He's getting a lot more work done. He ends up moving to the school with learning difficulty kids, like I mentioned in my previous video. But I'd say a couple weeks later, he decides that he's going to join the same gym that myself and my brother train at, right? So he joins up and I see him there, right? I'm training with my older brother. He's training by himself. And it's so obvious he has no fucking idea what he's doing. Like, his form is terrible. It's all over the place. He's not contracting the muscle properly. So I walk up to him and say, hey bro, like come train with us. Yeah. And this was the start of a tradition. Okay. We started training together every single day. I was teaching him proper form, this and that. But this is the point where I finally actually saw the neglect which was going on in Josh's life. I make Josh a meal plan and tell him, go to the grocery store, get these groceries, you know, eat this every day. And around a week in, he sends me a photo of a sandwich at school. You know, he's on Snapchat, he sends me a photo. And I say, what's going on with the meal plan, bro? You said you were sticking to it. And he tells me, oh, mum hasn't bought me food. So I talk to him that afternoon and I find out that his mum hasn't bought him food for months. She just doesn't do groceries. She expects Josh to eat whatever's in the Nan and Pop's fridge, okay? Which is almost always a sandwich, okay? So he wouldn't have breakfast, he'd have lunch and dinner, which was a sandwich most of the time. Josh ends up getting a job at Macca's to be able to simply just buy food. So all of his money was being spent on food and butts at the time, okay, which obviously is not the best, the second part of that. But just the fact that this motherfucker had to get a job to feed himself at 14, that should put things into perspective for you to see how good you've got it. I know it sure as fuck did for me. I knew how good I had it and still do have it. But Josh's life was so fucking different to mine. There was nothing common about my life, okay? There was nothing common about Josh's life, I should say. He lived far below average means, you know. He did not have a parent that actually cared for him. But bro, the reason it took me so long to actually realize that Josh was being neglected and that he wasn't from a stable home was simply just lack of education, okay? Although he told me all of these things, I simply just thought it was him spinning yarns. I couldn't see through the jokes that he'd make, you know, because he would make them publicly. You think of the most fucked up things that have gone on in Josh's life, he would make jokes about those things in fucking science class and the whole class would laugh at them. So I could never really take it seriously. School doesn't teach you how to see abuse or how to see neglect. And so shamefully it took me nearly a full year to actually realise how fucking terrible Josh's mum was to him. If I had just taken a moment to sit down with Josh, look him in the eye like I'm doing to you now, and said to him, bro, like, is everything okay? Like, you've told me these things are going on. Are you genuinely serious? Like, you're not joking? I want to get you the help you need, but you got to be honest with me. He would have straight out just fucking told me. But instead, he had to say these things that come across as, you know, sort of jokes, as sort of come across as not being very serious. He had to try and use humour to portray his struggles because he didn't know how to speak about it any other way. He didn't have anyone he could relate to. There weren't other cunts in his life who this was happening to. Crocker sure as fuck didn't have that life. I sure as fuck didn't. Dallas sure as fuck didn't. None of us boys could relate to Josh. So of course he didn't feel comfortable just straight out sitting down and being like, boys, this is what's going on, like I need help, okay? I need help. If he had just said that, we would have been able to, you know, sort something out for him and get him out of this fucking his house. All right, bro, so if you suspect something, just fucking ask, okay? It never hurts to ask. If you want to hear what happened after this story, watch this video that's on the screen right now. But with that said, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you were able to take something away from this video. I know this is a little bit different to the typical type of stories that I would tell. I will see you in the next one. Stay grinding, my G.